Simon Danczuk, who is a former Labour Party MP, now a Reform UK member and indeed former Reform UK candidate in the previous Rochdale by-election. Good afternoon to you, Simon. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's good to be with you, Alex.
Oh, it's always great to have you on board now. When you look at the pretty bad state of our economy, the flight of capital, when you kind of realise, for those who understand the jargon of economists, that we've pretty much hit the top of that Laffer curve and that all the taxation being applied by this government and previous governments is making actual capital flee our shores. People go, well, what's the point in being in the UK or doing business here? We're just taxed to smithereens. It seems to me a fairly ridiculous idea to be reaching into the grab bag of leftism, as Lord Kinnock appears to be doing, and suggesting that how about we just tax people whose assets are worth more than 10 million quid. A 2% tax on that could create £10 billion a year for the Treasury. Well, that's all very well, but I have a feeling people who have assets of more than £10 million also probably have very adept wealth managers and funds where they can move that money around and therefore not be taxed anything. That's the point, isn't it? It won't work.
Well, it certainly won't work. There's no doubt about that. And what we've seen with the Chancellor's non-dom taxation, we've seen people with wealth fleeing the United Kingdom, going to Dubai and elsewhere. And this isn't anecdotal, though I do know people who've left the country for these sorts of reasons. It is fact, and there's been information circulating over the weekend that shows people are fleeing Britain more than any other country to avoid the sort of taxes that Rachel Reeves is trying to apply. And, you know, well, some people might say, so what does it matter? Well, they make up a big take of taxation. You know, they pay for public services. And so she's effectively creating a very large black hole that needs to be filled. And then on the back of that, we see at the weekend, Lord Neil Kinnock adding in his two penneth, let's tax the rich even more, let's introduce a wealth tax. All the trade unions are in support of it as well. This is a return to the Labour Party's 1980s politics of envy and so-called equality. I mean, it just does not work. And we're going to be in a worse financial position as a country if they get away with this, if they implement something like a wealth tax. It's disastrous.
No, I agree. Shall we have a listen to that old fossil of Labour Party past and what he had to say about a wealth tax? Let's roll the clip.
So two things. You think that when Rachel Reeves comes to present her budget in the autumn, number one, she should contemplate tax rises. And secondly, you would say tax rises on wealth and assets.
Yes, I would, because I think they should stick to the fiscal rules they've established as a way of strong reassurance about their commitment. It's very, very, very important, not just for the public, but for the markets too, and indeed for their own self-confidence, which is very important.
I wonder how much the Kinnock family wealth is worth. I mean, look, maybe he's a philanthropist who's given all of his gains to charities. His son is married to, I think it's the former Prime Minister of a Scandinavian country, I forget which. But, you know, you wonder with these people, when it comes to rest on them and whether they send their kids to private schools, whether their sort of leafy five-storey house in Islington should also be subject to this tax, or whether they would probably sneak it into some sort of system where it is in a loophole. I mean, but this is the thing. As lovely as it sounds to a 6-year-old or someone who's read the, you know, narrative of Robin Hood and thinks that the wealthy should be gotten after to pay for the poor, well, it's like a fairy tale, isn't it? But the problem, that's exactly what it is. The Brothers Grimm could write it, and the outcome is indeed pretty grim. And you're right to bring up the fact, Simon, that there's been some data on this. It's actually Henley and Partners who've created a wealth migration report saying that, get this, 16,500 millionaires will leave the United Kingdom this year alone. 16,500 millionaires. So that's basically, oh, I don't know how much, a huge chunk out of the taxpayer portion that goes into the Treasury that's no longer going to happen. I mean, it's just the difficulty, though, and I want to ask your view on this, is it turns out that some of Labour's biggest union paymasters, they're the ones who sort of pull the strings, including Angela Rayner's former employer Unison, have actually backed this call, and that they're going to be raising the idea with the Prime Minister and lobbying Labour MPs. Now, just like the Conservative Party, often accused of being in the pockets of big business, the Labour Party, often when the unions come a-calling, especially Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana setting up their own fruit and nut party, I have a feeling Starmer might be quite spooked by this. Do you think he could cave?
Oh, I think he could cave. I mean, talking about the Kinnocks, they've done very well from the public purse over the years, you know, going on to be EU commissioners, both Neil and Glynis, his wife. And as you mentioned, Stephen Kinnock's doing all right for himself. I mean, they've done really well financially from the public purse over the years, no doubt about that. But in terms of the point that you make there, in terms of Starmer, the problem we have as a country now is that he's being held to ransom by his own backbench Labour MPs. We saw this over the disability benefits proposals. He had to cave in on that. That's created, I think it's a £4.5 billion black hole that Rachel Reeves now has to find the money for. Whatever's now going to be suggested by the leadership of the government and of the Labour Party, by Starmer and Reeves, is going to be challenged by Labour MPs. And so you will have Labour MPs calling for a wealth tax and pushing for this to go forward. And that's a real concern, not least, not for the millionaires, but for the economy. Because if the wealthy people continue to leave, if they continue to avoid paying the taxes, we have less tax take to pay for public services. Right. And it becomes a spiral of descent into significant problems.
Yeah, people want to know why Switzerland is so well heeled. It's because a lot of people manage to squirrel their money away there without much hardship. Let's talk now, because you mentioned sort of welfare reforms. Apparently, the welfare Mark II difficulty that Starmer could land himself in, the quagmire of revolt, is going to be down to reforms of special needs education, special educational needs, should I say, provisions for that, where that is apparently going to be reformed and will focus on early intervention, improving provision for support in mainstream schools rather than forking out for much more expensive specialist schools. Now, it's not particularly an area that I know a great deal about, but apparently figures last month showed 639,000 children in England were being given financial support from local authorities in order to help with either the right to education in a special school, the access to a dedicated teaching assistant, or in fact even paid transportation getting them to and from school. And that the special needs budget will be around £12 billion, up from £8 billion around 5 years ago. Certainly, we have to be looking into why this budget has gone up by £4 billion, up by 50% in just 4 years. But it's a delicate topic, isn't it, Simon?
It's a very emotional topic, and any member of parliament, I was an MP for a number of years, you will have parents coming to you making representations for their child who has special educational needs and or a disability. But what we've seen in recent times is more specialist schools being established as opposed to providing education in mainstream schools for children like this. And there's a big debate about that. But the Education Secretary wants to move away from specialist schools back into mainstream schools. And there is a good, strong argument for that in terms of the children themselves. But and it might sound callous, but you can't give parents everything and anything that they want for their child. You know, we can't as a country afford, as you point out, to increase spending over a couple of years from 8 billion to £12 billion. So we have to have a more sophisticated system of identifying what should be spent on which child. And that's what I think she's trying to do. But I think it's the Times newspaper today points out, this is going to be another rebellion within the Parliamentary Labour Party. There are Labour MPs saying that they don't want the changes that Phillipson is proposing.
There's some pretty big question marks over the way that welfare is conducted in this country, without a doubt. I mean, I can't get over this sort of mobility scheme where people are given cars for having anxiety and things like that. That's something that needs looking at. And I remember, because things when you're a journalist stick in your head like a fly stuck to a piece of flypaper, which is when there was all the controversy about councils, local authorities being put in special measures because they were going bankrupt, and in some of them, the transportation of just one child to school via a taxi due to having special educational needs was costing authorities upwards of £1 million a year. And you have to think, well, how on earth can it cost that amount to ferry a child to school? But a very delicate subject indeed. And I think also someone needs to get on top of why there's such a huge uptick in diagnoses of things such as ADHD. Let's focus now on the fact that it is the anniversary of the 7/7 bombings. A dreadful day. I remember it very well. In the period, in the aftermath of the 7/7 bombings of 9/11, and during that whole period, while you had a load of people fleeing over to Syria to join ISIS, we were constantly being updated on a traffic light system basis of what our terrorism alert was, you know, whether it was an amber, whether it was green, whether it was red. We don't tend to hear of that anymore, but something suggests to me, particularly given the fact we've got a load of undocumented men from the Middle East flowing into Britain, given that we know that IRGC, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates freely on our streets, given all of these pro-Palestine marches and the prescription of Palestine action, I would be staggered if the terror threat had reduced since 7/7. I would imagine it's probably higher than it's ever been.
Yeah, I were reading the testimony of somebody who managed to survive 7/7. They were at Edgware Road tube station when one of the blasts went off. I mean, it's exceptionally tragic. I actually think we don't do enough to remember that day, actually. Just because it's 20 years and it's a particular number, we're remembering it today. But over the years, I think we've decided to forget, and I think that's a big mistake. So I think we should remember those that died. You know, in New York, they remember.
Do you think, I'm going to suggest something, Simon, do you think that there's been a almost deliberate effort to forget or to minimise what happened 20 years ago for fear of it creating further social tension? Or do you think that's me being especially cynical?
No, I think there would be some truth in that. I think government and agencies are very sophisticated about not wanting to remind us who committed these types of crimes. I actually think we're very lucky in that something similar hasn't happened. And when I say lucky, I think we've got an exceptionally impressive intelligence service in Britain that we underestimate, actually. And they keep us safe on a day-to-day basis. But it only takes one or two incidents or occasions when somebody gets through the net. And we know where that threat will come from if we're totally honest about it. It's from residents in the UK who are Muslim. I mean, that's where the threat tends to come from, and that's where it came from in this instance. And I think we should examine these issues more closely so that we are more aware of them, so that we talk about it and we are more alert to the threat. I think that's a positive, but it's not what we've been doing over the last 20 years, I'm sorry to say.
No, indeed. We're going to be talking about this throughout the course of the show. We're going to be speaking a bit later on to Dr. Alan Mendoza about where the terror threats might be today, because his think tank, the Henry Jackson Society, monitors this stuff extremely closely, so he'll give us a very clear picture of where he stands, and that's in connection as well with the revelation that the security service had said to the Labour Party to prescribe Palestine action back in March. The threshold had been reached back in March, but the Labour Party didn't want to do it ahead of the local elections. That doesn't surprise me at all.